welcome back to Heather's on Culture. We want to start this episode a little different than usual because here's where we would normally tell you something about what's going on in our lives. But I think we are both coming here with heavy hearts.
Right, twin. We just have so much to discuss in this episode, and I think it's important to get straight to it. So, first, we want to issue a trigger warning. In this episode, we will be discussing violent and graphic incidents that may be sensitive for some. So, make sure that you protect yourself as needed.
But don't worry, we'll end as we always do with joy as resistance.
I always like that plan, twin. So, let's get started.
All right, so we're going to start with something that we've all actually lived through. So in 2020, the world watched George Floyd die on camera. A police officer's knee on his neck, 8 minutes, 46 seconds. We heard him say, "I can't breathe." And we watched his body stop moving.
And before anyone explained anything to us, our bodies already knew. People cried, people felt sick, people felt rage. And, something in us just said, this is a killing, this is murder.
And then the official statements came out, not to clarify what we saw and what happened, but to blur it.
They didn't say murder. They said medical distress. They said an incident during an arrest. They said protocols were followed.
And that was the second violence, because now the question wasn't what happened, it was whether we were allowed to name what we saw.
And let's be real, the third violence came when they waged war on George Floyd's character and argued that somehow he was deserving of this death. And to this day, people continue to defend this state-sanctioned violence by doubling down, by claiming that his lack of perfection made his death excusable, stripping him of humanity. So for some, this was the first time that they were able to see these actions clearly. And, for others, this was something that has always been crystal clear. The gap between what we witness and what we are told.
So let's fast forward. And we see the same script with ICE today. So people die in detention. And suddenly the story is about they have pre-existing conditions, or it's an ongoing investigation, or there's no evidence of wrongdoing.
And in that process, the body disappears from the story and responsibility dissolves into process. This is all part of the process.
And then we have January 6th. We watched the mob storm the United States Capitol. Police officers were beaten. Chants for executions were heard. Elected officials were running for cover. A constitutional process was violently interrupted.
But later, we're told that this was legitimate political discourse. So a violent insurrection became a protest. An attempted coup became a misunderstanding. An attack on democracy became a difference of opinion.
And in every case, the move is the same.
Basically, you see violence and power tells you it wasn't violence. It wasn't what you saw.
You recognize the harm, and then authority tells you not to trust your recognition.
And that gap between what we witnessed and what we're instructed to believe, that is the space where gaslighting lives.
Because what we're living through is not confusion by accident. It's definitely confusion by design.
And that's precisely why we're calling this episode Gaslighted.
So first, we need to strip the pop psychology out of this word. So gaslighting is not just that someone lied. Gaslighting is when power repeatedly denies observable reality until doubt replaces certainty. And the key word here is repeatedly, because one lie is a scandal. Repetition is systematic.
Right. You see this with intimate partner violence, where individuals who have been survivors of it, they recognize this immediately. The goal is not persuasion in any way, it's destabilization. And so they are told, you're remembering this wrong. That's not what happened. You're too emotional. You always exaggerate. Gaslighting.
And the Trump regime has been and continues to gaslight the American people.
Yep.
And its most recent act of deception comes in the aftermath of a federal ICE agent shooting and killing United States citizen Renee Nicole Good, a 37-year-old mother and poet in Minneapolis, another in a series of killings tied to the Trump administration's massive immigration enforcement operation.
So, witness footage shows her in her vehicle backed into a residential street before a federal agent opened fire, killing her.
So let's recap this because we need to make sure that we're clear on what happened on January 7th, 2026. So, from publicly released video footage from multiple sources recorded during the immigration enforcement operation in Minneapolis,
We see a video that opens on a residential street in winter conditions. A red SUV driven by Renee Good is stopped at an angle, partially blocking the roadway. Other vehicles pass around the SUV.
then we see unmarked vehicles with flashing lights are parked nearby. Federal agents approach the SUV on foot. One agent moves to the driver's side door and pulls the handle and tries to open it. The door remains closed. Good's spouse is standing outside the vehicle, facing the agent and gesturing and speaking.
And the SUV briefly shifts position and then it begins to move forward. Its front wheels are turned to the right, away from the ICE agent standing in front of the vehicle. And as it moves, the agent reacts verbally, and the cell phone camera recording the scene jolts upward.
Several gunshots are heard in rapid succession. Video footage seems to show that he fires the first shot through the windshield, in which, in the aftermath, we see one bullet hole through the windshield, but two more shots through the open driver's window.
The SUV keeps moving and eventually crashes shortly down the street. People begin shouting and running. The agent lowers his weapon and he rapidly leaves the scene of the shooting. Other agents move in and they block off the area.
Emergency responders arrive later. Then she was taken from the vehicle and later dies.
But what happened next is the textbook move. Instead of acknowledging what people saw on video, officials, including Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, responded by claiming Good was a domestic terrorist who weaponized her vehicle and intended to run over officers. Even the administration circulated language to that effect through spokespeople like Stephen Miller's network.
And all of this is happening within hours before we have any investigation. We know everything that's going on, but let's actually hear some of her gaslighting. And Kristi Noem has an interview with Jake Tapper on CNN State of the Union on January 11th, 2026. And I'm going to play this video for us so we can hear what she had to say.
For your comments, the shooting, we should note, was Wednesday at 10:37 a.m. Eastern. Just over 2 hours later, the Department of Homeland Security put out a statement definitively asserting what had happened, defending the ICE agent, accusing Renee Good of domestic terrorism. That's a characterization that you reiterated in a press conference half an hour later. Now, Republican Senator Tom Tillis said, quote, "It was very unusual to have a senior law enforcement official to draw a conclusion about an event where the scene was still being processed. Generally speaking, law enforcement would recognize that a life was lost, that families are changed forever, the shooter's life will change forever. We're collecting video. We're trying to assess the situation." Why did you not wait for an investigation before making your comments?
Oh, well, everything that I've said has been proven to be factual and the truth. This administration wants to operate in transparency. I have the responsibility as the Secretary of Homeland Security to know this information as soon as possible. Had just been in Minneapolis the day before, had already had conversations with officers on the ground and supervisors and knew the facts and decided that the department and the people of this country deserve to know the truth of the situation of what had unfolded in Minneapolis.
Well, with all due respect, Secretary, the first thing you said was, quote, "What happened was our ICE officers were out in an enforcement action. They got stuck in the snow
Correct.
because of the adverse weather that is in Minneapolis. They were attempting to push out their vehicle and a woman attacked them and those surrounding them and attempted to run them over and rammed them with her vehicle." That's not what happened. We all saw what happened.
It absolutely is what happened. Those officers had been out in enforcement action. A vehicle had been stuck. They had come to help get that vehicle out. That's when this individual started blocking traffic for minutes
So
and
you
minutes
said that the
before
woman
this
attacked them and surrounded them and attempted to run them over and ram them with her
blocked the
vehicle.
blocked the road for a long time and was yelling at them and impeding a federal law enforcement investigation. That's what you need to focus on, Jake, is they were breaking the law by impeding and obstructing a law enforcement operation. They were breaking the law already, and these officers were doing their due diligence and what their training had prepared them to do to make sure they were handling it appropriately.
You said within hours of her being killed, you said that she was a domestic terrorist. How do you define domestic terrorist?
She weaponized her vehicle to conduct an act of violence against a law enforcement officer and the public.
How
So
can
as
you
they are doing that,
how can you assert with certainty that she was trying to hurt the officer as opposed to she was trying to flee the scene?
if you look at what the definition of domestic terrorism is, it completely fits the situation on the ground. This individual, as you saw in the video that we released just 48 hours after this incident, showed that this officer was hit by her vehicle. She weaponized it, and he defended his life and those colleagues around him and the public.
Ooh, so, as we already recapped, there is no video from any vantage point of the SUV hitting the officer. It crashed down the block into a light pole. But what we heard from Nome, the sequence in which we heard this matters, right? Each step moved responsibility further away from violence and closer to inevitability. Because the real footage, the bystanders, the neighbor testimonies, even local leaders, shows a woman driving away from federal agents, not attacking them. Yet the official narrative was pushed first before evidence was even public. And once the evidence was public, twin.
Right. They still try to tell us what you see is not what should be believed. And so, and even worse, they released the agent's own cell phone footage, believing that it would exonerate him. But to me, instead it condemned him further. Because he jumps in front of the car, he shoots recklessly, and then someone believed to be the agent says fucking bitch as she lies dying. And they deny her medical care.
What we saw with George Floyd, reality articulated by millions, gets thrown into competing reality. And what we saw with ICE deaths becomes a dangerous anomaly instead of a structural pattern. The similarities are so striking.
And, it's also there with January 6th, except it goes a little bit further because now there's another twist. This administration is placing the gaslighting into archives. It's not just rhetorical, it's archival. They are rewriting the narrative and trying to tell us that what we saw with our own eyes was not what happened.
Yes, like that when people say, who you gonna believe, me or your own eyes? And January 6th, wasn't just softened in speeches or interviews that we've been seeing over the years, but it has literally been rewritten on official White House website, blaming Democrats and leftists for breaches and gaps in security.
And we've heard Trump himself even say, the Biden placed the FBI in the crowd to try to get this insurrection started. The problem with that is Biden wasn't even in office. It's like the insurrection is no longer described as this attack on democracy. It's reframed as a moment of political protest or a period of civil unrest, a disagreement that escalated. And that's gaslighting.
The violence was drained out of the language. There's no mention of mobs attempting to stop the certification of an election, no mention of chants for execution, no mention of coordinated political violence. This website was put up as an excuse and a justification for why Trump would pardon the 1,500 people that were arrested and charged.
And they just focus on the disorder. They focus on the excess. This is just something that went too far. And that's gaslighting at the highest level because now the state isn't arguing with you. it's rewriting the record.
Yeah, and it's like police brutality becomes a failure to follow protocol. An attempted coup that we all saw live and in person becomes a protest that escalated. I watched that live. I was teaching a class and I watched that live with my students, and honestly, we could not believe what we were seeing. I remember leaving home, seeing that this was happening, going straight to my classroom, and before I even started the lesson, turned on the news so that we could watch live, and we all know what we saw.
When I remember that my daughter had a snow day that
Mm.
day. And so I decided to go ahead and do her hair. And we're in my room and, the TV is on because I want to watch this. I want to watch, this historic moment because, of course, Kamala Harris was getting ready to become the first Black vice president, first woman vice president. And so I sat there watching it. And as it's happening in real time, I just couldn't believe it. And I remember my mom calling me to just chit chat for a second. And I was like, you would not believe
Mm.
what is happening right now. These people have lost their minds, Mom. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse as we went. And at that time, I had a separate podcast. And I'll never forget that my friend Delaney, who was my co host for that podcast, we sat and had a whole episode about this.
Mhm.
And it's like, this is historical record because this is what we were, saying at the time. I remember Mitch McConnell sitting and saying, nope, this is too much. This is too far. I remember what these people said. And now all of a sudden it's being rewritten. And what they said in real time, what they tweeted, what they testified to, all of that is being slowly stripped away to gaslight.
Exactly. And my favorite part right now is the protesting in Iran. The people of Iran are protesting against the Iranian government, and Trump is consistently going on TV to say that he encourages the people of Iran to keep protesting against their government, and then he's threatening the government that if the government doesn't stop killing their people for protesting, then he's going to respond with violence against the Iranian government. But yet, you as head of government is at the same time in your own country gaslighting your own people about the government killing, dragging, kidnapping, beating, torturing, raping United States citizens, people that are on the path to citizenship. And not only that, just people in general, whether you are here legally, whether you have your papers, whatever, however you want to say it, we have state sanctioned violence here, led by the man that's egging on other people in another country to fight against their government. But we better not fight against our own. We better stand in line or else we're going to be killed.
Well, this works for me, but not for thee. And
Yeah.
so that's the whole story of Trump's existence in politics.
But also the history of the United States as a whole, right? Colonial violence is justified as foreign policy, and anyone who insists on naming any of these things differently is accused of being divisive and hysterical or dangerous, or they just don't know what they're talking about.
The reality is that now naming harm has become a crime. They're trying to make it become a crime.
Mm. So now, before we go any further, we want to pause a little bit and let you hear something, because what we're describing is not abstract. It is happening in real time.
Yes. So we're going to play the first couple minutes of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett speaking on the House floor.
As I play this, listen not to just what she's saying, but what she's responding to through her words.
It is so hard to sit here sometimes because I didn't come to Congress to write laws or to do things that are hurting people. I'm just asking if there's any decency or heart or courage on that side of the aisle. The fact that a woman was killed, she was shot in her head, and y'all are pretending like nothing happened. I remember when Charlie Kirk got killed. Do you? Do you remember what our response was? Our response wasn't to sit there and pretend like it was okay. Is it okay because you have a badge? Because the last time I checked, allegedly no one is above the law. Can y'all not just have a little bit of courage and humanity? A child is lost her mom, and y'all want to pretend that it is okay. I am asking if there is anyone that will stand for the very people that elected us and sent us to Congress. You tell us things like, well, the immigrants are bad, and so we got to get all these bills because the immigrants are the ones that are causing the harm, they're bringing the crime. The mayor of Minneapolis told y'all to get the fuck out. Yet y'all are the ones, it is this administration that is bringing crime
Mr.
to their
Chair,
streets. That's what's happening.
it's the third incident where somebody has dropped an F-bomb in this committee,
Well,
including the video,
I'm sorry.
including the
Are your
video that we
princess-
had to watch
Are
earlier.
your princess ears okay?
Is it profanities?
The princess ears
House of
offended?
Representatives.
The committee?
Are about the fact that a woman.
It's when that gets me every single time. Like, whew, every single time. So, what we heard is not just outrage for outrage's sake. Like, this was a sitting member of Congress fighting to re-anchor reality. And notice what she had to do before she could even make a political argument.
Yeah, she had to restate the facts. She had to insist on sequence. She had to say, this happened, then this happened, and you cannot pretend otherwise. That is the labor gaslighting creates. Before you can debate policy, you have to debate reality. And Toni Morrison warned us about this, about the labor that racism creates, right? We have to
Right.
consistently defend being here. We have to consistently defend our reality, our humanity. And that takes us away from the actual dismantling of racism. And so it becomes a distraction. And so the gaslighting, the racism, the other isms are all distractions that pull us further and further away, not just from reality, but from the action that needs to be taken to meet the moment.
Right. And I think that what really bothers me is she makes this impassioned plea. And it's obvious that she is hurt by the fact that she has to do this. And yet, what was the response? She said an F-bomb. It's callous beyond words. And it just shows us that before we can even demand accountability, we have to demand acknowledgement. And that's not accidental at all. That is, discipline. That is them saying, here's the hoops that you have to jump through before we will acknowledge you.
Whew. It hurts my heart that we're seeing all of this violence because of the circumstances. It's seen as okay or warranted to take someone's life and then to worry more about language and decorum on the House floor than the fact that we have a woman dead for
Right.
no crime at all.
It's the audacity, too, of demanding this decorum when we have a president that regularly calls people names, that breaks every form of decorum that you can imagine. Yesterday, there's pictures of him flipping a worker off at an auto plant in Michigan because this worker called him a name, and he flips him off. And yet, these are the same people that are just like, yeah, that's no problem. We're angry that Obama had the nerve to wear a tan suit. These are the same people, And so even these demands for civility, for decorum, etc., it's all gaslighting. It's all gaslighting because, again, it is what works for me doesn't work for you.
We need to be very clear here in this moment that gaslighting doesn't just confuse people emotionally. It restructures movement because every movement depends on shared understanding.
After George Floyd, like millions of people agreed on what they saw, but then came the pivot. It was one bad cop. Let's wait for the investigation. Let's not rush to judgment. And so organizers who were naming the system, which is, policing itself as a system and the way that it's set up and the protections it affords, they were told that they were being unreasonable.
Not wrong, premature is what they're saying and claiming. So after ICE killings, including Renee Good, the move is even sharper that we're seeing. So because now organizers are forced into forensic mode. They're not organizing against detention as a system. They're arguing about camera angles and timelines and the turning of a wheel and vehicle trajectories.
And it's all gaslighting. They're defending the dead against state-authored character assassination. And every hour that we spend doing that is an hour not spent building power. Gaslighting doesn't stop movements by disproving them. They're not trying to disprove them. They're just trying to distract them. They're trying to exhaust them. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge that even though we are speaking from the perspective and about Renee Good, because it's so obvious that you can see the gaslighting, etc., we also want to acknowledge Keith Porter and his death at the hands of an off-duty ICE agent. And let's be honest, also, I want to acknowledge the disproportionate response to his murder versus Renee Good's murder. That it would be a whole nother episode to examine why that happens.
Yes. Definitely our hearts go out to the Porter family and Keith's loved ones, and then also the other people that have died in ICE detention and those that have been tortured, starved, and sexually assaulted and harassed and told that that is not the government's problem, that they can do nothing about what they're experiencing in detention. Totally not true. But we need to get to another moment of precision and crack this open a little bit further because whiteness is not the same thing as protection. And so when we're talking about Renee Good as a white woman, and we're talking about Keith Porter, who's a black man, and the folks that have died in detention who are brown folks, the outrage comes because Renee Good was a white woman and some people just can't believe their eyes. And so this is why we need to talk about this because whiteness only works when it's aligned with power. And Renee Good was not aligned with the power at question, which is ICE, federal agents, the Trump administration. And so the minute her whiteness became disruptive instead of stabilizing what was happening or going along with what was happening, she lost her shield of whiteness.
And, George Floyd was black. So the gaslighting erased his humanity. Renee Good was white, and the gaslighting erased her innocence in this particular situation. And when we think about also, look at Kyle Rittenhouse and the three people that he murdered, of those two were white. And they demonized those two as well because they did not align with power.
Exactly, like trying to make sure that we understand that Renee Good was married to a woman and they were raising children in a lesbian household. These distinctions matter because, as I said, when whiteness is aligned with the state, it's granted empathy. But when it's misaligned, it gets reclassified. So Renee Good doesn't get treated as a grieving mother or a confused civilian. She gets turned into a domestic terrorist.
Precisely. And I feel like that should ring an alarm bell for everyone because that tells us whiteness is not protection. The only thing that's protection is compliance. But I also want us to clarify the fact that compliance is only when you are complying as a white person with power, because right now there's this big push. Like, if Renee Good had just complied, she would have been fine. Well, no, in that particular situation, she was being asked to comply with people that were trying to exercise authority over her. But she had already committed the sin of not complying with whiteness.
Right. But also they were giving her conflicting
They
commands. Some
weren't.
people were telling her to get out the car, some people were telling her white to get in the car, some people were telling her to get out the road. I mean, there were all sorts of things being yelled at her.
They
But
weren't.
yes, that's the reality, but the
Right.
psychology behind it is that she wasn't there to aid ICE in what they felt they needed to do and what they feel is right and they feel is cleaning up
Right.
this country.
So
She was
when
there
we
to
say
disrupt that.
And so when we say compliances, we're talking about compliance with whiteness. And because she had already, committed the ultimate sin of not complying with that, with whiteness and not complying with power, any other compliance that she would have done, even in trying to follow those directions, wouldn't have been enough.
I know that this lays bare a truth that may be really hard to reconcile with, and that is that white supremacy seems to be only disrupted by white bodies in the street, dead or harmed by violence, by state sanctioned violence. It's not enough, unfortunately. It doesn't seem to be enough that you're speaking out, that you're protesting, that you're trying to be the person or the white person that uses your privilege to shield and shelter. It's not
Right.
enough to speak out. It's not enough to disrupt. It almost seems like it's not enough to even lay their bodies dead in the street for spectators to see. But it's
Yeah.
becoming very clear that that is right now in this moment with this regime, with this moment in time of white supremacy flexing its muscle. This is where we are, that this is what it's going to take. And that reality is just sobering.
It's sobering and it's disheartening and it's sad, as both of us as human beings who the reason why we do this work is out of an abundance of empathy for our fellow man, regardless of color, regardless of any identities or the intersection of those identities. The loss of any life is devastating. And the reality that already this administration has caused countless lives to be lost because of not just policies, but direct actions. And knowing that in order for more things to change, there's going to be more destruction. That is very, very disheartening.
It's important to say that we're in a time where we can't afford for organizers to misread this, and especially white organizers, because we assume that whiteness will insulate until it doesn't.
Yes. So we've seen this like with the environmental activists and our war protesters, student organizers. The moment they threaten legitimacy instead of policy, the tone shifts and they stop being like concerned citizens.
Yeah, they become radicalized because now we're hearing that about Renee Good. They become unstable, outside agitators, radical leftists. And suddenly the same tools used against Black and Brown communities show up and are loud. We're talking surveillance, we're talking character assassination and procedural discipline.
And gaslighting teaches everyone that same lesson. Like, you are protected only as long as you are useful. And I think that that is something that is really hard for people who are not used to as they step into organizing circles, not used to realizing the fact that there comes a time when using your voice is dangerous and you have to make a decision of if you're going to accept their danger in order to ensure that it's going to be, better on the other side. And we have seen too much within the Black community of people who made that decision and paid an ultimate price. And it is scary, but that's what they intended to be, because what they're ultimately trying to do is to stop people from using their voice, stop people from organizing, stop people from standing up and saying, no, this is not what they want. And so that, even though that's a very real threat, it still is something that it's like, you have to make a decision like other people have made in other times of fascism and authoritarianism visiting their country.
And that reminds me of advanced compliance tyranny. So it refers to a societal state where individuals and institutions, in fear of self preservation, voluntarily adopt authoritarian behavior by preemptively obeying potential future demands of a repressive regime. We're seeing that, but we're not seeing that, right? Like people are out in the streets and they are mad. And this has been a tinderbox, and rightly so. And the administration doesn't quite understand what to do with this. I think this is why January 6th is so revealing, because those perpetrators were white and they were aligned with power. They weren't challenging the system, they were trying to control it.
So in this particular situation, like gaslighting worked in their favor. Violence became passion. Coordination became confusion. And an attempted coup became political.
Right. And so when we compare that to white protesters who oppose the state, like anti fascists, climate activists, student encampments, they don't get grace. They get labeled as extremists.
And that distinction is not based on race alone, it's alignment. It's about the system and who aligns with the system.
And so here's the final move that we need to name and speak out loud. Gaslighting does not last forever. Eventually, people stop arguing with the lie.
And that's not because they believe that lie, but it's because they're tired. So they adapt and they learn how to live inside that contradiction.
So gaslighting teaches people something very specific. It teaches them not be white, but be obedient, be legible, be useful to power.
And the moment that you're not, your identity just won't save you. And so that's why the system is really dangerous, because it turns protection into a performance.
And once people learn that protection is conditional, they adapt. They moderate themselves, they shrink their demands.
And they normalize what they were taught to fear. And that's how gaslighting becomes a way of life and a hindrance to true social, political, and systemic change. Because in the end, when those individuals decide to accept the gaslighting, they do so because they know a lot of times that the system won't harm them. Again, as long as they align and comply, the system won't harm them. And so they watch as their neighbors who aren't afforded the opportunity to comply are harmed.
And then we see, like, with those of you who haven't checked out Timothy Snyder, his book on tyranny, we see, as I was talking about, this advanced compliance tyranny. So we see anticipatory obedience. So the people are anticipating what the authoritarian ruler might want, and they offer compliance before being asked. So they make the job easier. And then we see self-censorship. So individuals suppress their own views or actions that might attract negative attention, even if they are still legal. Then we get institutional complicity. Businesses, media, professionals also engage in this by changing their policies or downplaying criticisms to avoid conflict, giving power and more leeway. And lastly, or maybe in conjunction, we're seeing the erosion of our norms. So each small act of preemptive compliance teaches the aspiring tyrant the limits of public tolerance, normalizing oppressive behavior over time. That is where we are. Everything that I've named, we've seen. But we've
Yes.
also seen people bucking the system. We see people saying, no, enough is enough. We are not going to comply. We are not going to self-censor. We are not going to obey. We are not going to change what we know to be true. And we're not going to take this laying down, and we are willing to put our bodies on the line and our livelihoods on the line to protect people, regardless of whether or not they have papers that say that they belong here. So I'm proud to say that we have people that are standing up for this.
I used to teach English, as you know, Twin, and we taught books like Lord of the Flies in 1984. And I taught The Once and Future King, The Sword and the Stone. And all of this was to look at governmental census, to look at what's happening and kind of talk to people about how do you recognize some of these patterns. And so I think another aspect of beginning the compliance also are those individuals that they get on board. They align so much that they gaslight themselves into thinking this is the right thing to do, and they get on board. And I remember conversations we used to have in class with Lord of the Flies about what possessed people to go along with the most horrible thing. And that's the reason why we've got to pay attention to what our motivations are. We have to be able to self-assess and to figure out how am I complicit? Whether that is intentionally or unintentionally, how am I complicit? And what do I need to be doing to speak up? Because if we don't have people saying no, then we're going to continue our, unfortunately, it feels like rapid slide into fascism because everything that you just mentioned is everything that we can see happening in real time right now.
So, in closing, remembering that gaslighting is not confusion, it is and becomes governance. It is the first step in teaching people to live with what should never feel acceptable.
And once people adapt, power moves in and locks it in.
I want to move into one of our favorite parts of the podcast every time we record, which is our Black Joy moment. So it's time to end like we always do with joy as resistance. So, Twinsy, what was your Black Joy moment this week?
My Black Joy moment this week was Wunmi Masaku and that yellow dress, baby. That yellow dress. But then, of course, was also her non-announcement pregnancy announcement. And I
Yeah.
loved that article. It's in British Vogue. You can Google it. But this beautiful article about why in this yellow dress at it was Golden Globe, why she was going to not hide her growing baby bump, but how she was resisting this being framed as a pregnancy announcement because she's a woman who happens to be pregnant and she's going to celebrate with her cast members and all of the people that had a part in making Sinners the absolutely phenomenal film that it was. But that woman is, in my opinion, like one of the most gorgeous women on earth. And that yellow dress, just wow, pop. It was gorgeous. But then I'm going to take a second one. And Twin, you don't even know about this one, but I paid attention to. So before we went to record, Twin called me and was like, "Hey, I'm on my way into the house, and we're talking about some stuff as far as making sure we're bringing up specific points, etc." And I paid attention to the fact that even though you literally were going to hang up, walk in the house, and log into Zoom, we took time to say, "Love you."
Yeah.
And that right there, when people wonder, like, why my life, no matter what happens, feels so blessed, it's because of moments like that. Like, I'm consistently surrounded by love and joy and support and care and intelligence and challenge and, just all of the things that really make life wonderful. So I love you.
I love you, Twinsy. That was beautiful. I have two. I saw a Instagram video of these two guys. They decided to go into a Walmart in Tennessee. I forgot which city. They brought a rolling speaker and they were playing like old school R&B and just like dancing, right? And so they're running through the Walmart, like one is dancing, the other one is filming. And so they're just going up to random folks in the checkout and having them dance with them and doing little dance battles and stuff. People started like gathering around and recording. And so they were going up to each person and dancing. And they started like a Soul Train line in the middle of the Walmart. I was doom scrolling today and to see that pop up on my timeline, I always make sure I engage with those happy things. Like I like it or I share it or I send it to somebody so that those things always pop in the middle of my logarithm. Remind me that there's still hope, there's still laughter, there's still joy in the midst of all of this that can be so disheartening and so suffocating.
I
Yeah.
saw that too, but when I saw it, it was like where the big crowd was there. And
Yeah.
I mean, they were just straight kicking it. And I remember thinking to myself, that looks like a Walmart. And then I realized, no, it really was a
Yeah.
Walmart. So that was incredible. I love that.
Yeah, and I loved it because it was white people and Black people and
Oh,
Hispanic
yeah, it was
people,
all
and
kinds of
I mean, it
people.
was just going up to every and anybody, and everybody was, like, feeling it. They were dancing. They made them not feel, like, ashamed to dance, whether they had that most advanced moves or the not so advanced moves.
It was
It
so fun. It was so fun. I was
was
like, I want to be there.
I ain't gonna lie, cause I would be dancing. I mean, I'd
Oh,
be
yeah, I'd be
dancing in the
getting it, girl.
Walmart by myself. Let a good song come on in the store, in Trader Joe's or when I'm in Walmart or somewhere. I be in there singing and dancing myself.
The Dollar General around the corner from my old apartment used to be in there singing, just rocking because they had an excellent soundtrack. So whoever did the soundtrack over in there, they did their big thing. They really did. So okay, so what's your second one, Twin?
So my second one is Tiana Taylor's acceptance speech
Yeah.
at the Golden Globes for winning this Best Supporting Actress in a Film for one battle after another. One quote from her speech in particular: "To my brown sisters and little brown girls watching tonight, our softness is not a liability. Our depth is not too much. Our light does not need permission to shine. We belong in every room we walk into. Our voices matter and our dreams deserve space." I got chills because it reminded me of so much of what we're trying to do with this podcast and what we try to do for each other and anyone else that is in our midst. Just a reminder that we get to be a light, we get to shine, and we don't need permission to be who we are, and we belong and we matter and our voices matter and our dreams matter. And so thank you for everyone who listens and shows up for us in all the ways, always, and reminds us of this
Yep.
every day. Bye. Love you.
Love you.